Greetings and welcome. We are in Junior English, and we are now going to turn to a conversation of Arthur Miller's Death of Salesman. I have already given, and it's now posted on Learn Strong and YouTube, an introductory lecture on Death of Salesman, where I do two things. One, I introduce the theories that we will call Aristotelian, of or relating to Aristotle, and his understanding of what it means to look at, study, appreciate, he would like that word the best, appreciate a tragedy. The second thing I do in that lecture is to discuss some of the similarities, and we'll talk a little about this even in this lecture, but the similarities between Arthur Miller's two presentations, Crucible and Death of Salesman. We'll kind of talk a little bit about how those things are similar. What I want to do now is I want to talk about Death of Salesman from three different perspectives. I want to talk about this play as a play of sociology. I want to talk about this play as a play of psychology. And I want to talk about this play as a literary text. Okay? And here, we'll maybe spend a little bit of time talking at 3A, that comparative analyses between two texts, or more, maybe. Okay? We, yesterday, had a conversation where we kind of set up the different ways that one can appreciate, study, interpret Arthur Miller's Death of Salesman. Let's now turn to, first of all, this text as a critique, some would even call it an analysis of certain kinds of sociological understandings. Now, let's make sure we get our terminology out of the way. Sociology, the group, and how the group thinks and acts. Psychology, the individual, and how the individual thinks and acts. Now, obviously, there's interplay. You can't have a group, sociology, without having an individual, psychology. So they are symbiotic. They go together, right? When we look at this play as a work of sociology, we're going to look at it from two, at least, different perspectives. One perspective will be how Death of Salesman is going to inform our attitudes on the family. That institution that we're often told is the foundational building block of a civilization. If you want to know about how a civilization is going to either thrive or not thrive, then study how it understands this view of family, so we can talk about it from multiple perspectives. And then we're going to ask another sociologically derived view, and that is economics. This is notice called Death of a Salesman. That is to say, economics has something to do with what's going on in Miller's criticism of this play in regards to sociology and economics. Later, we'll maybe even ask this question: in what ways is Willy Loman a lot like Gatsby? Another text we've studied, right? Great Gatsby. How do these two share in common an understanding of what the American dream is all about, and whether that American dream is ever a reality, or is it mythology? And it's a mythology that's pervasive, right? That's pervasive. We'll then turn to this text as a work of psychology. We'll ask about Willy Loman, we'll ask about Linda, we'll ask about Biff and Hap as characters who are driven by certain kinds of needs that we would call psychological needs, and how those needs then help us to understand the relationship between these different kind of characters. Finally, we'll look at this work as a work of literature, and we'll ask, as a work of literature, how does it work? What makes it work? For example, what are the primary conflicts of a text like this? Do we actually see a pretty clean rising action, climax, falling action, or denouement, as we are often told by Freytag and other critics? This is the way you study a great work of literature, especially a play. Does that work? And then, of course, we can ask about the validity or the invalidity of things like the ending, as we commented about. Let's turn now to sociology. You could argue that this is a play about family, and that's really all that it is about. It's just about family and the permeations. It's like, on layers of layers of layers on top of each other. But let's call it what it is, a dysfunctional family. By the way, a term that's not used in this play. Dysfunctional is not used in this play, but it's kind of understood. There is something fundamentally wrong with this family. And it begs a really intriguing question when you study the play. You actually study the manuscript of the play after you've already watched the play. And that's the fun way to do it, is to go back and ask this question: at what point do you, the viewer, come to understand this is a dysfunctional family? Okay? But using the term dysfunctional begs another question, and that is, what would a functional family look like? So, for example, lots and lots of people who study the history of people like to turn to things like religious texts. It's interesting how often religious people of, to some degree, believers in these religious texts, will inform us that family values sits at the heart and core of everything that the religion is about. You can often hear, for example, religious, people who will say, the most important thing about religion is that it informs a certain understanding of family values. And then, for example, they will offer to us a religious text, which always begs a really intriguing question. When you look at, for example, a religious text, I don't know, maybe like, for example, we could say the Bible. We can ask this question: do you find any kind of family in those texts that looks anything like the mythic understood idealized family? And the answer, by the way, to that is, no, not at all. In fact, you can't find that traditional family. What do we mean then when we use the term traditional family versus dysfunctional family? Like, what do those two terms mean to you? You can probably jot down a quick definition of what is a traditional family to you. You've normally got what? Well, it's going to look from the outside looking in. Are you ready for this? Pretty much like Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman. You're going to have a mom. You're going to have a dad. Dad is gainfully employed. In the 1950s, notice mom doesn't have a job. Okay, mom's job, I say doesn't have a job. I mean, if you've watched the play, you know she has a job. But notice what she says. Pick up those flowers, you bum, you. I'm not your slave anymore. It's interesting the language that she uses. In other words, it's almost like Linda, it clicks. It hits her. I've always followed these three boys around, done everything for them. I'm not doing it anymore. She's almost like washing her hands of it, But Linda doesn't work outside of the home, we would say. She is not a provider of the economics that we'll talk about in a moment. Willie does that, and then two boys. So you've got a mom, a dad, and two kids. The only thing missing is a dog to constitute the traditional family. So question, what makes this then dysfunctional? And are we in fact flawed in even using the term dysfunctional family, because you might as well just call it a family? Because there's no such thing as a non-dysfunctional family. Because families, by their very definition, when you put a whole bunch of people together, you inevitably are going to have these challenges that, for lack of a better term, we're going to call dysfunctional. In other words, it really is more like on a continuum, where you can have extreme dysfunctionalism or marginal dysfunctionalism, but either way, you're going to have family, you're going to have dysfunction. At what point in the play does it occur to you, something's wrong with this family? Not something is wrong with Willie, not something is wrong with Linda, not something is wrong with Biff or Hap, but something is wrong with this family. It's like something's wrong with the chemistry of the family. We sometimes use that term, chemistry of the family. Is there a point in the play that you could jot down that you identify something is fundamentally flawed with this family? And I notice I used the word flawed to refer to an earlier lecture that I gave on Death of Salesman in regards to the Aristotelian understanding of character flaws, right? We'll have that protagonist's flaw that leads to his Martia's downfall, right? Okay. Is there a familial flaw? Is there something wrong with this family? Notice this doesn't get treated until the very end of the play, when Biff has the unmitigated gall to say out loud what everybody knows to be true, and that is he uses the pronoun we. Notice the pronoun I is used throughout the entire play. I this, I that, I this. Each individual kind of behaving in his own way, in his or her own pattern. But then by the end of the play, Biff is ready to make some comment about everybody, and notice where it's done. In the most important room in any family domicile, in the kitchen, right? Notice that's not a living room conversation. Did you notice that? Notice all the primary events of this play, when we're talking about the family, happen where? In the kitchen. You have the one or two scenes in a bedroom, but the feel of those scenes is different, right? The kitchen is the congregation place. So everybody comes around the table, right? And notice Biff will use the pronoun we. What does he say about the family? We haven't done what? we haven't told the truth for 10 minutes. Notice immediately, Hap, interestingly, is the one that comes to the rescue of the defense of the family. That's not true. We've always told the truth. No, you're not the assistant to the Bible. Well, I'm practically, yeah, you're practically, what does he say? You're practically full of it, which is a term that by the 80s and beyond, by the 70s and the 80s and beyond, it became kind of a normal jargon term. To be full of it was code language for you're full of, BS. We know what those two letters mean, right? It's a Dante reference. It's a Dante reference to Inferno, where flatterers and liars are dumped in a river of poop where they swallow poop over and over again. We'll study this later as seniors when we meet Dante's Inferno. To be full of BS is literally to spew out fecal matter. And that's what it means. So when Biff says you're full of it, we all are. Then he follows it up. We all are. So he's not indicting one of his brothers. He's indicting the group. Now all of a sudden we're studying the family. What is wrong with his family? Well, Biff says it's a very simple proposition. There's no honesty anymore in this group. Nobody tells the truth. And because nobody tells the truth, then nobody, what? Can you finish it? What's the big so what here? So what? So nobody tells the truth. Big deal. What's his point about this? So nobody tells the truth, which means what?
No trust.
We have no trust? Good, keep going. We don't know each other. Yeah, we don't really know who each other is. I mean, we have this kind of mythic idea of who each other is. Keep going. That we don't tell the truth within the family. What else? What is missing, what is lost because of this inability to tell truth?
No love.
No love. No love. There's this bizarre admiration fan club thing happening, but no love. No love. Notice Willie Loman's defense of having a mistress on the road in Boston is, I was just so terribly lonely. And some viewers of this play have said, that's really true. From a sociological perspective, everybody lives on an island. They're so alone. Linda, alone. Biff and Hap, alone. They're sad, lonely people. They live in these cramped quarters. Notice, always talking about how the buildings are making it tighter, right? But they live alone. They're totally isolated from each other. Why? Well, Biff says it's because they can't tell the truth. They don't know each other. They don't trust each other. They don't love each other. Ergo, we can't solve our problems. To solve the problem of the dysfunctionalism will require some level of understanding that can only be attended through trust. Now, this does beg an interesting question. If you had a only tell the truth day in your family for just one day, where every single person in the family had to tell the truth, what are you thinking? Oh, you don't get to say nothing. Oh, you don't get to say something other than what you're thinking. You actually have to say it out loud. I was thinking that you are the biggest you-know-what I've ever met. Because that's the truth. That's what you're really thinking. Good or bad? See, Biff says, this is what's wrong with our family. That dysfunctionalism begins with a lack of truth-telling. But this begs the other question, does telling the truth ever really solve problems? There is the telling of the truth, and then there's the receiving of the truth. Notice, we watch it on stage play out. Biff says, as he rolls up his sleeves, notice with the Malkovich version, rolls up his sleeves, we're going to tell the truth. And he does what? Slams down the hose on the table. Hose? What hose? Yeah, the hose that we met earlier, which is going to be an important symbol of this play. Willie Loman's escape. What does Willie say? Oh, I'm so glad you brought that out. Now is the time. Let's deal with this. I want to kill myself. And the reason I want to kill myself is because I'm so unhappy. And the reason I'm so unhappy is, well, Biff, you're right. We haven't ever told the truth. Let's tell the truth, and let's start by saying, this is what's wrong with me and Biff, Linda. The problem is, I took a mistress and he discovered it. And for all these years, he's lived this really dysfunctionally screwed up life because I was unable to admit. No? What does Biff say? Or what does Willie say? I don't know. I don't know. Notice Biff doesn't back down. You do know what it is, and there will be no pity for you. Whoa. Biff's telling the truth. He even says as much. He says, I looked at the sky and the things that make life so simple. The sky, he mentions sky, his ability to have a smoke, his ability to have a little meal. And he said, and I asked myself, why am I trying to be what does he say? what I'm not. Yeah, why do I try to be what I'm not? And lots of viewers of this play, especially high school students, resonate with these lines like, yeah, that's it. That's the essence of the challenge is, why do I always try to be what I'm not? Why can't I just be myself? Right? As if Biff knows who his self is. Of course, there's the sociological understanding of economics as well. Is it true that the dollar ruins Willie? This machine that kind of grinds him up and spits him out. To use Biff's language, you end up in the dustbin, in the trash bin. In other words, you're used and then you're thrown away. Earlier, you'll remember that the conversation, Willie tries to say it, a man is not a piece of fruit. You can just eat it and throw away the peel. Of course, Mr. McAfee will point out, that's exactly what a man is when you put a dollar sign next to his name. You are worth what you can produce. Willie Loman can't produce anymore. He probably never really was that great of a producer. He always inflated or padded what he said he had done. But now, he's not producing at all. Part of it, of course, is he's physically breaking down, right? I mean, he's getting older, can't stay up, can't keep up. But there's a pivotal moment, and it will explain the title as well. Because the title of our play is not actually about Willie Loman, is it? The Death of a Salesman is not about Willie Loman. It's about Willie Loman's referencing another salesman who he says was the ideal. This guy was the perfect salesman. He could make sales right from his hotel room in his slippers. He was that well known. He was so respected. And when he died, and he died the death of a salesman. It's a brilliant, it's just a little, and he died the death of a salesman. And he just keeps going. Of course, who's he telling this story to? He's telling this to Howard, this young kid who's got absolutely no time to hear what he has to say. Why? Because he's got to make money. I got buyers waiting. Fix yourself up. Get out of here. I got work to do. W-O-R-K with a capital W, right? I don't have time to hear about your stories. Willie wanting to tell a really important story, though. The death of a salesman. Everyone came. So well attended. Which will set up, of course, that pivotal graveyard scene at the end of the play where nobody's there. Nobody's there. Nobody, Linda will ask, where is everyone? Maybe they blamed him. Is Willie ruined by the American dream? And what's fascinating is that he doesn't expect his son in high school. Notice, Willie doesn't talk to his boy about going into business. In fact, he sees Barnard as anemic. It's an interesting adjective. Anemic, why, Barnard, why are you looking so anemic? They make fun of him. It doesn't shock us later that Barnard ends up, of course, being a very high, powerful lawyer who is going to represent a case in front of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court? No, he didn't even mention it. He didn't mention it because he's actually going to do it. Charlie's insights are brilliant in this play. He's like, yeah, he actually is going to do it. He doesn't have to talk about it. Ouch. Willie spends all of his time talking about things he'll never actually do. Or his boys. Oh, he's something big. Hey, he was out in the West. He can't tell the truth. My boy's a complete, loser. Can't say it. Can't say it. They'll all play tennis together. All play tennis. You notice? This is all part of this economic vision, this dream. Of course, Karl Marx has to be said here as, being an important influence in the life and thinking of somebody like Miller. Marx said it this way, this is the problem with economics. So you've got people who own the factory, and then you've got people who work the factory, and inevitably the people who work the factory, a whole lot more of them, and inevitably they always end up with less of the actual product, the money, the value of their work. But they work a lot harder than the people who own the actual factory. And Marx said, sooner or later, you're going to see revolutions. Later, this will be called a Marxist revolution. Marx himself never called it that. This communal idea, the early ideas of communism, the Communist Manifesto, of course, where all these ideas come from. Not all of them, but many of them, along with Engels. And yet, you're kind of seeing the back end of this whole idea in this play. I mean, Willie has worked for the man. The man fires him. Charlie's like, they fired you? Right? Biff is like, it happened. They fired you? Of course, inevitably what happens? You work, then you don't work. What does the guy do after he doesn't work? Take him out and put a bullet in his head. No, something far worse, this play says. You just let him die a slow death. Unless they decide to end it. And why does he take his life? See, this is interesting, and it's the whole point of the conversation with his ghostly relative, right? He's not actually there, but is there. What's the reason for him killing himself? It isn't to escape. Well, according to what he says, he imagines what Biff can do with $20,000. How's Biff going to get $20,000? The insurance. Oh, yeah. Killing himself is his attempt to make one last deal, economically. He dies a salesman. At the very end of the play, he is still thinking in economic terms. 20,000, imagine what. Which takes us now to, of course, a conversation about the psychological component of this play. We could find ourselves asking, who is Willy Loman as a psychological critter? I mean, when we look at him, when we look at Linda Loman, who is she? These characters that Miller draws. Of course, on the one hand, let's just call it what it is. These people are very familiar to us. If you spend any time around families, you're familiar with the hardworking dad, the mother who's very supportive and puts up with lots of crap even though she probably shouldn't, the sons who don't understand or respect their father's work or their mother's work. And, I mean, this family looks fairly traditional in many ways. But from a psychological perspective, Willie is like an onion. Or, of course, if you're into Shrek, parfait. He is definitely multi-layered. Early on, for example, notice he has difficulty looking into the mirror. What does he say about himself? I'm very foolish to look at. And then he says it. What's wrong with him? I'm too short. I'm too short. When he sees himself, his first thoughts are not how great he looks, or how powerful he is, or how successful he is, but rather how foolish he looks. They laugh at him. He knows they laugh at him behind his back. He tells us he cracked somebody across the nose because that somebody said something about his stature. And later when Charlie suggests, when will you, what's he say? Grow up. That's the thing that just, it's like pouring Coleman fuel on the fire. What is at the heart of Willie's inferiority complex? It may be that he himself raised in a somewhat dysfunctional family, where he did not have that relationship.
He kind of builds up this abrasive shell, that's
very abrasive shell. He's very much about protecting himself.
Yeah.
Right. And then there's this thing about his boy. Notice I didn't say boys, I said boy. He has one son. The other one is kind of like the throwaway. And of course, many viewers of this play who have grown up in a family where they were the vaunted one, they were the priceless diamond. They kind of have a feeling about this. And those of us who grew up in homes where we were not the one, we have a tendency to identify with poor Happy. It's like, poor guy, I'm getting married. Yeah, that's nice, that's nice. I'm losing weight. Yeah, that's nice, that's nice. Nice job. So they completely patronize him. What is going on, though, with Willie and his boy Biff, and why is it that he has to live so much vicariously through the athletic accolades of his boy? Notice it's not his academics. He could care less. He could care less about the mind.
Well, his father before him did an even more meager job than he did.
It's an interesting kind of chain reaction, we might say, right? An interesting chain reaction, which does beg a really intriguing question. What kind of dad, if it ever happens, will Biff Loman be? And again, we asked this question yesterday. Is it possible to identify the way you were raised and say, later in your life, I will not raise my child or children that way? Is that possible? Or are we rather a product of the familial air we breathe? And therefore our own personal psychological dysfunctionalism is symbiotic with the air we breathe familial. There's no way to get away from it. You don't escape it in the same way that you can't escape the air you breathe. It is the very essence of who you are. And because that's the case, it's only a matter of time before you begin to act out the very kind of patterns of behavior, psychological concerns that you have been kind of given through your upbringing. Well, that is
Or
deeply
you have
depressing to
to
one or two viewers of this play. Surely there's a chance of emancipation. Surely there's a way to escape. And I use the term escape, which will allow us to finish our conversation by thinking a little bit about this as a literary text. We think often in comparisons to, for example, the play The Crucible, or I've already mentioned it, Fitzgerald's classic Great Gatsby. Let's look at these two texts as companion reads and ask about Death of Salesman. It is a work of literature, which I think one of you said, maybe Mr. Mackie said, on the page it's just words. But when rendered on stage by fine actors, it can produce these powerful emotional scenes, right, that we watch. Let's ask about this as a work of literature. And ask, first of all, about how it compares with the other text that we studied of Arthur Miller's, namely Crucible. To what degree do you find the protagonist of Crucible, John Proctor, and the protagonist of Death of Salesman, by all accounts Willy Loman, similar characters? How are they both trapped? Miller writing us two plays about people who are trapped. What is John Proctor trapped in? Oh yeah, both lead characters have an infidelity which stands right behind the action of the play, that leads to all kinds of collateral damage that they refuse to accept or embrace as being of their creation until it's too late. Both willingly go to their death in what starts to appear or look like kind of
the interruption, students and staff, I just want to give you some results of our latest
there is, as well, of course, the challenge of Gatsby. To what degree is Gatsby a trapped character? I'll go ahead and end this lecture now on the video side.
Congratulations, Taryn.